Welcome back to The Big Question, where tonight we're talking about the overhauling of the 844 system of education to introduce the 2663 system of education in the country. In studio, we have Dr. Kilemi Mweria, the Presidential Advisor on Education, on my right. And on my left, we have Dr. John Mugo, is the Country Coordinator of Uwezo Kenya, an initiative that conducts the largest citizen-led learning assessment in East Africa. Gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Maybe I can start off by asking why there is such a need to review the current system. Is it not working?
Well, you know, thanks, Janet, and I'm glad to be on this show. Let's go back. You know, there has been a lot of concern by many Kenyans about the current system. They talk about the quality. They talk about how many young people are not transiting from one level to another. They talk about it not being relevant for the needs of the future, 21st century, and especially Vision 2030, and how it is mainly mainstream towards passing of examinations, you know, memorization of facts, as opposed to preparing young people for, you know, life outside, you know, even for self-employment and to be able to survive and be flexible in employment. So the system has been, you know, accused of not being flexible, of not being creative, or not being, you know, oriented towards problem solving, but more importantly about not responding to the needs of the future. But wastage and quality are major issues.
Well,
and the government, the Jubilee government, made a commitment. The Uhuru Ruto team made a commitment that they would address this issue, and it's along those lines that these issues are being addressed.
Those are your views, Dr. Mugo. What are yours?
I think in agreement with what Dr. Kilemi is saying, the biggest concern is wastage, that we have a system that is for a few. It favors just those that are academically oriented, and every other child who has so much other valuable potentials has no place in this current system. Stepping back, when we look at where we started with the current system in 1984-85, then it was about adding one more year to the primary school so that we may have coverage of more practical skills for then where we were as a country, for self-reliance, so that as you complete primary school, you'd be able to do something for yourself. But at that time, more than half of those completing primary were not proceeding to secondary school because secondary schools were few coming from, you know, at the face. But that has somehow outlived its purpose. And also, when you talk about 844 right now, I think we should call it something else.
We should call it something else.
Something else, because it's not 844.
Why do you say that?
The original 844 had practical subjects, home science. We learned how to knit, we learned how to make tools. We learned many different things, including music and other things. Those were removed one by one because of the economic situations, but I think also because of low funding.
Yeah, and do you think that was a huge disadvantage?
It was a huge disadvantage because when it was introduced, I think many people were convinced that it's the right way to go, because Juakali was also coming in and having skills was really necessary. And so we must be honest that what we have now is not what we started.
Dr. Mweria, some people are saying we are rushing to introduce this new system. The country isn't ready. Some even arguing that 844, even though Dr. Mugo has said we should call it something else, is not particularly or necessarily working. Do you feel like we're rushing? Is there a sense that maybe the rollout, we're not ready for the rollout and we still need to take a bit of time? Well,
you know, let me say that unlike previous reforms, including the 844 that we have cited here, and the free primary, you know, and free primary education, I think there has been a lot more preparation for this. The process started way, you know, beginning of last year. It's going to go on until the end of this year. So we have had at least 2 years of preparing. Secondly, the system has also not been politicized. The 844 system of education, we were told you take it or leave it, and it was implemented very hurriedly. So I'm sure we have time. And let's not forget that even when we talk about a overhaul, there is not so much that you can do to a system. I think the basics are there in the current system. It's just a question of orienting it and asking where do we have problems, you know, what the 30% of where we can improve in terms of skills orientation, in terms of teaching other values, in terms of preparing our young people much more for participating in what will, you know, will be, you know, happening around here and elsewhere. I don't think we would, I wouldn't say that. You know, as of now, already, you know, Dean's assessments have been carried out, the policy documents have been developed, teachers will be trained before, you know, end of September, and all the other preparations will take place.
But I think, to be honest, looking at what is happening, For us to do a reform, because there's a difference between a curriculum reform and a review. A review is touching a few things that we think have problems. A reform is stepping out and looking at it holistically. What is it that we need to fix? I think for us to do a good job and looking at the curriculum reform cycle, we need to allow more time, and I think whoever needs to be convinced that let's extend it, because we have done the needs assessment. Tomorrow we have a national conference that communicates the findings of the needs assessment. From there, we now move to what is called scope and sequencing, arranging now the contents.
So your view is that we are kind of rushing into this. We need to step back, reassess, review, take a bit more time
and do a good job, because we have been having this for 30 years. So why should we feel under pressure of finishing this by 2017 when actually we could take one more year and do a good job in terms of quality of materials, in terms of preparing teachers to take up this new task and new thinking, because we are moving from what they call objective-based curriculum to competency-based. And
very quickly, very quickly your response before.
My response to this is yes. I mean, certainly when you're making such a big change, and given the investments that you have to make in education and the expectations of Kenyans, yes, we need time. But the way the system is being designed, as will be made clear tomorrow, is that there will be opportunities for reviewing what is happening. The start is with the first 3 years, and even by June next year already there will be a review of whether or not we are successful with the first 3 years. And if there is need to change, that change will take place. So we learn by doing. But I think the gradients are there. I think we'll be rushing ourselves a little bit, but also, as you know, Janet, at some point you have to decide, I have to start. Free primary education, there were challenges, but the Kibaki government came and said we'll start now, and there were many people that benefited. Of course there were challenges, and there will be challenges with this system. The question is, are we going to be prepared to ask questions about where we can improve it as we move along?
All right. I think there's a huge issue that's come up about access and affordability of this system. The same opportunity that a child, for instance, in Kiambu has, the same access to those facilities, a well-ventilated classroom, for example, is not the same access that a child perhaps in Turkana has, where they're learning under a tree. This has also bedeviled the education system in many ways, when we see, especially with the examination results. How do we intend to address this issue with this new system?
Yeah, I mean, equity is a big issue, because we live in a country that is so different. You have children sitting for the same examination. One had more teachers than they needed. Another one were in a school that had only one teacher for the whole school. And we cannot now hide away from equity issues. Even the capitation model of giving every child 10, 20 shillings, that in Turkana who are learning under a tree, where there are no classrooms, and where there are few. So the capitation grant per child is really in itself aggravating inequality, because money goes where there's money, because where there's money is where there are people. And so they have numbers, and they have built the infrastructure over time. Where there are fewer people, where they don't have infrastructure, they get so little money, because the school could have only 90 children. And so when you multiply 90 by 1,000, they have 90,000 per year. Really, we are aggravating inequalities, and this needs to be discussed.
And that then forms a vicious cycle, because if that's what you're saying, if it's not going to where the large numbers are, then you then create that vicious cycle where they remain as is. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, my thoughts, I have been a great advocate of us getting our education system to be as proper as we possibly can manage. And the capitation grant is one of the inputs that are going in. And there's a move by government to see if that can be increased. But even as that is being done, there are investments in improving facilities, especially when we partner with county governments and the constituency development funds. There are improvements with regard to introducing ICT, the computers for children and computer labs. It's some progress, but it is precisely because the system is so unequal that we are saying we should emphasize examinations, because examinations only reward those who are advantaged, those who are privileged. So what we need to do is to ask, given your circumstances, have you learned certain basic facts that qualify you to proceed to the other level, without necessarily comparing you to a kid who has been to a top, primary school that is much better funded. So even by just looking at that and looking at content and how you test what you have achieved, and by allowing a lot of the poor who do not make it, past KCP and KCSE, an opportunity to proceed and help them along, in terms of upgrading their skills, we are addressing the issue. But it's much more complicated, and of course it will take time. But I think we must begin to confront it.
It is complex, and I also do want to get your views, Dr. Mugo, on this, because it's the question of whether you develop the infrastructure first and then change the education system, or vice versa. And I know that's also been the criticism of the rollout of the laptops projects, for example. So people saying, if you're not going to develop the infrastructure of a classroom or a school, how then are you going to introduce something? How will it be progressive? So why not focus on developing infrastructure first and then overhauling the system?
Of course, looking at it from an objective perspective, it is better a person who lands under a tree and ends up with something than one who lands in a story building and you end up with nothing. Not to demean the role of infrastructure, because if some people are landing under the roof and you are all Kenyans, why then shouldn't a roof be an entitlement of everyone, wherever you are? But then, in the long run, I think learning outcomes is what is critical. At the end of the year, what is it that you have gotten from that learning experience and exposure? So as long as we target to make learning outcomes equitable, infrastructure would have to fall in place.
Yes, and then let's specifically look at the introduction of computers, Janet. And you said, development of infrastructure should come before you bring in the computers. And actually, that's precisely what government has been doing. First of all, ensuring that every school has electricity. And then secondly, ensuring that there are 2 computer labs per school, irrespective of where it is. And then the computers that will be available to the kids. So that's infrastructure. Again, the challenge is big, as you can imagine. But if we can all partner, so that we don't leave it just to government. If we ask county governments to do their bit, we ask, the constituencies to do their bit.
Then we should be able
I think we'll get there. There'll still be inequalities, but I think you still have a chance. I better have, a subsidized secondary school education system where I can get many more Turkana kids getting a C+ and above and able to go to college, than limit it, and because I'm not as well prepared to equip them as well as those in Kiambu or Meru.
Some people are asking, why not go back to the previous education system, the 74231? Why, and also criticism of why do we keep having to change our systems? How do we know this one is not going to need an overhaul soon enough?
Actually, let's look beyond the number of years, whether 7 of primary or 8 of primary or 6 of primary, and look at what is the principle behind the whole thing. For me, it's like we are going back, because when you look at having every child develop their potential, then technical education comes in. We used to have that, technical schools. I'm sure when Daktari here went to school, there was Meru Technical School and the other kind of schools that were really for that. And that's what you're talking about, a pathway. When you look at other aspects that are being proposed of ensuring that we have earlier specialization, that is what Form 5 and Form 6 were about. Getting a few subjects and you start thinking about your career, and before you enter university you already have decided, and people have nurtured that early potential. And so we are moving now to earlier specialization. We are moving to pathways that accommodate more potentials than just the academic potential.
And I'll just very quickly say this. An education system is as good as what you put in it. The Americans have 844, the Brits have the old system that we used to have. But even if we went back to the other system, unless we address the issues of quality, and there would have been issues, because there would have been more kids than the schools and the facilities that were available, unless you address the issues of equity, unless you ensure that more women are getting more opportunity than before, but more importantly, unless you prepare our young people to take advantage of the skills that are needed in the world in the future. This would have to happen with whatever system we had. So I don't think that's an issue. And sometimes I think we can get too emotional about it, because a lot of those people who are asking for that system is more because they went through that system. A lot of young people like yourselves who went through the 844 system don't have a problem with the system. So, I mean, it's...
Okay, fine. Very quickly, you want to comment, because we're winding up.
Yes, but I think let's be honest that there has been too much wastage. We have a system that has been favoring only around 10% of those that are cognitively, intellectually gifted, and the rest go to waste. And yet, when you look at the needs of the economy and the labor market, we need all this multiplicity of talent. And so we need to go back to a system that recognizes, identifies, and nurtures everybody's talent so that we develop.
All right. Thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts. A discussion that needs to go on, of course, and getting Kenyans involved. Tomorrow is obviously the big day, so we'll be looking out for that. Thank you both once again. Stay with The Big Question. We'll be back right after this break.